Medieval wall paintings, I think, are an underappreciated aspect of medieval history, especially in England, as you might not see many unless you come across some accidentally, or, if you're like me, seeking them out, as a lot of medieval wall paintings were either whitewashed or stripped away over the centuries, from the Reformation and well into the Victorian age. The history of medieval wall paintings seems to take a back seat to the more economic and military history of the Middle Ages. In this video, I want to showcase some of my favourite locations that feature medieval wall paintings, and to give a brief history of each site and what happened to their wall paintings. Also during the video, I'll show you some ways you can support each site and what you can do to help preserve these iconic pieces of art history. Let's start with my personal favourite location for wall paintings, St Mary's Church, Kempley, in the county of Gloucestershire. St Mary's has within it an amazing amount of incredibly preserved wall paintings, dating from the 12th century. Most of the church is of Norman design, apart from the layout of the church, as the Norman family of the de Lacys sponsored the building of the church, which was formerly a Saxon church. The Normans, after conquering England in 1066, not only built many castles, but also changed many Saxon churches to more Norman designs. The most famous example is St Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury. As for St Mary's, it's located in a rather obscure location in the countryside, and most people would come across the church from the many public footpaths that are dotted around the area. The wall paintings inside the church are the typical ones found in medieval churches, showcasing Christian images such as Christ in majestic on the vault with seraphim and signs of 4 evangelists. What I really enjoy about St Mary's wall paintings is that it's one of the few places where you can really connect with how the peasantry over the course of the Middle Ages would have experienced their way of living when attending church, as the paintings existed to teach them, as nearly all peasants could not read. So, if we go by a population of, say, the height of Middle Ages England before the Black Death, so 6 million people, and about 80% of them were peasants, that's 4.8 million people who couldn't read or write. So the images were important for them to learn about a God-fearing life. The cynic in me sees it somewhat differently. And like all churches from the Middle Ages, St Mary's suffered from the Reformation, where the wall paintings were whitewashed, basically painted over. It would be over 300 years later that these beautiful wall paintings would be rediscovered in 1872. St Mary's is a phenomenal site I'd highly recommend visiting. As for supporting the church, membership to English Heritage is one way of supporting the safeguarding of sites like St Mary's. And if you'd like your support to be more local, you can join Friends of Kempley Churches, who maintain and safeguard the church. Our second site is the Gild Chapel, located in Stratford upon Avon, in the county of Warwickshire. You may have heard of Stratford upon Avon, as it's the birthplace of William Shakespeare, the most hated man in the world if you're a teenager studying English. But whining about studying Shakespeare is much ado about nothing. The Gild Chapel has a connection to Shakespeare's father, but we'll look at that later. The Gild Chapel had a modest start. The story of the Gild Chapel starts in 1269, when the Guild of the Holy Cross was given permission to build a hospital and chapel in Stratford upon Avon. The Guild of the Holy Cross was a religious and charitable guild, not a trade guild. The most striking feature as you enter the church is the painting of the Doom, and not the fun one where you rip and tear demons. The Day of Judgment, showcasing the good souls ascending to heaven and the bad and wicked being devoured by demons. On the left is heaven and on the right is hell. Most medieval churches had some form of a Doom painting. Again, as most of the population couldn't read or write, this was a way of informing them to keep to good Christian lives, or to control them depending on your interpretation. The next major wall painting is a poem in Middle English about the inevitability of death called Earth Upon Earth, dated around the 14th century. It's beautiful in a harrowing way, although looking at a close-up of the skulls, it's humorous that they're smiling back at you, almost taunting you as if one day you'll join them. This image is the best preserved one at the chapel, with the smallest details surviving, including the red worms. There are other wall paintings, such as the classic one of the martyrdom of Thomas Becket, one of the many Archbishop of Canterbury, but they're heavily eroded. Work is still going on to restore most of the wall paintings. As for the Shakespeare connection to this church, the tale goes, like similar guilds elsewhere, the Stratford Guild had become wealthy and powerful, but this wealth and power was part of their undoing. During the Reformation in the 16th century, when England went from being a Catholic country to a Protestant one, King Edward VI dissolved all religious guilds in 1547 and confiscated their property. It was the end of an era. In Stratford and across the country, the chapel was closed after the guild was dissolved, but the wall paintings survived until 1564, when they were covered over with whitewash following an injunction from Queen Elizabeth I. And it is thanks to William Shakespeare's father, John Shakespeare, that we know when this happened. He was the town chamberlain at the time, and he recorded the payment of 2 shillings, about 10 pence, in the town account for defacing images in Ye Chapel. The chapel itself had a variety of uses in the following years. Parts were rented out. It was used as a preaching venue. It was a petty school. And in the 17th century, a Puritan vicar was accused of allowing his children to play ball and his servants to hang clothes in there, allowing his dog to use it, and using it for his pigs and chickens. The chapel is one of many historical sites around Stratford-upon-Avon, and work to restore these great wall paintings is still ongoing, so it's worth checking out. As for supporting this chapel, you can directly donate via their website or even hire the chapel out for social events. The next site long-time subscribers will recognise. It's another Doom painting, this time located at St. Nicholas's in Lower Oddington, a small village tucked away in the hilly Cotswolds of England. This site contains the largest Doom painting I've seen. However, this site is also the one at most risk, as the site's location is quite hidden and the church doesn't have as much protection as some of the other sites. The reason for this church's isolation from the town of Lower Oddington is the Black Death, and the original village was moved away. The church itself is dated from the 12th century, with alterations added on from later centuries until the suppression in the 16th century. Unlike the previous wall paintings, St. Nicholas's was whitewashed before being rediscovered in 1913. The paint used is described as, in 1340, mineral pigments red ochre, yellow ochre, umber, lime white were readily available and cheap. The pigment would have been mixed with egg and water to make a paint. Green would have been green earth from Verona in North Italy, and azurite would have provided blue. Although ultramarine was available, the high price of the pigment sourced in Afghanistan meant that it would only have been used by wealthy patrons. St. Nicholas's is managed by the Even Load Vale Churches group, who look after 6 other parishes, and like the Gild Chapel, each church is open to inquire for marriages and baptisms, with a giving page which is linked in the description and pinned comment. Our 4th painting is located in a large museum in the city of Worcester in the county of Worcestershire, the Commandery. The original site started off as a hospital managed by a monastic group and remained as such before 1540, when the hospital was surrendered to the Crown during the suppression under Henry VIII. The room with the remaining wall paintings is called the Painted Chamber, and is described as, "It is likely that this wing of the Commandery was originally built as the infirmary to the hospital of St. Wulfstan. People in medieval times relied on prayers and the goodwill of God not only for their spiritual well-being, but also for their physical health. It is thought that the inmates of the hospital were brought to the painted chamber to pray for healing and forgiveness in the last hours before death." This lovely chamber features the typical saints that were popular, again the martyrdom of Thomas Becket. There's also Christ sitting on his throne painted on the ceiling, so if people were brought here in their last days, they may have found comfort looking at the saintly figures while praying for their souls. The Commandery gets its name as it was the command centre of Charles II's army before the final battle of the English Civil War, the Battle of Worcester. The Commandery is a large museum with different wings showcasing English history from the High Middle Ages onwards, with a focus on its medieval roots and the English Civil War. You can support this museum through donations or membership. You can even hire parts of the venue for weddings or enjoy the escape room on the top floor. There's a lot to see in this museum. Our final site is Gloucester Cathedral in Gloucestershire. This might be the most famous site as bits of the Harry Potter films were shot in the cathedral. But first, I must apologise to you, the viewer, as the image on the thumbnail and at the start of the video is not a medieval wall painting. I have tricked you. It's Victorian, and the reason I wanted to showcase Gloucester Cathedral is because it encapsulates the hypocrisy of the lifespan of medieval wall paintings, as Gloucester Cathedral is a brilliant example of the 180 turnaround, as in one section of the cathedral is a bare bones wall which would have had wall paintings on it, and on the other side is the beautiful chapel painted in 1866 to return to the beauty of wall paintings. The timeline goes, wall paintings are a symbol of medieval life, to whitewash over the course of the Reformation, to the Victorian age where they're seen as a crucial part of heritage and history. Although the problem is that the Victorians had different groups that had wildly different ideas on preservation. Some sought to repaint the glory of wall paintings, and others wiped them away. An example of this bare-bones style is St Mary's Deerhurst in Gloucestershire. That concludes our video on the beauty and heritage of medieval wall paintings. I hope you enjoyed the video and felt inspired to visit some of these sites. Cheers.